guys to Hallam Lake and to our second night of Potbelly Perspectives. This series is brought to you by our two sponsors, Two Leaves in a Bud Tea Company and Breckenridge Brewery, who have provided us with refreshments tonight. So this is one of two series that you guys can attend here at Hallam Lake. The other is our Naturalist Nights, which run from January through March on Thursdays at 6 p.m. And this Potbelly series is every Wednesday at 7 from January through March. The next Naturalist Nights, which is tomorrow, is going to be Denizens of the Alpine, Breeding Site Selection and Winter Movements of Brown-Capped Rosy Finches by Amy Sieglund of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department and Aaron Yappert, a wildlife biologist. But tonight our topic is the last descent of the Blue Nile, and our speakers are Curtis Berklund and Scott Lacy. Who in 2017 embarked on a whitewater rafting expedition down the Blue Nile, a major tributary of Africa's Nile River, which starts in Lake Tana, Ethiopia, and runs north into the south, or into the Sudan. And their expedition embarked just weeks before that river system would be forever changed by a dam built just by the Ethiopia and Sudanese border. So thank you and welcome Scott and Curtis.
Thank you all for coming. Especially thank you all, if I can find my cursor on your screen. Thanks all to many of you in this room supported us and gave us good vibes and love and helped us process this trip when we got home and allowed us to go on such an expedition that we truly have never been on. We don't think we'll ever be on one quite like this ever again. And so jumping right in, it's going to be impossible to summarize our 2 months in Africa into 45 minutes, but we're going to hustle and we're going to try to get all the points. Right off the bat, we went on the last descent, what was widely considered the last descent because of that dam being built. That picture is from 2019. You can tell there's not actually a lake behind it. There's not actually a completed dam yet. But at the time, we were under the impression that it was going to begin filling in December 2017 while we were still on the river. And that's why it was widely thought to be the last chance to go from the bowl straight to the ale house. And yes, the upper 600 kilometers would remain runnable into the future, but this was our last chance to kind of do the entire thing that is very controversial, is going to disappear soon into the future, and has caused a huge amount of diplomatic nightmares in the area. And so real fast, before we go down the river, I just want to give a little background on why this was such a big deal and how important this river is. This is Africa. It's huge. Has anyone in this room been to Africa before? Quite a few. It's the only continent containing every natural resource needed for humanity to exist in one area. And to give it a sense of scale, this is most of the major developed nations that fit within it, which is pretty amazing. Africa itself is 54 countries, and to give that a comparison, all of North, Central, and South America is only 35. That also means, it's also complicated because every single one of those countries kind of want a piece of it. That's a ton of different militias, governments, watersheds, religions, cultures, all trying to jive into an area that's really complicated. Thank goodness we did not have to understand all of Africa. We were looking at a little specific area on the Cape, or sorry, not the Cape, the Eastern Horn, and specifically Ethiopia. Ethiopia is an amazing country. Its name means the mother or motherland in the native language of Amharic. It's the only country not colonized by the British in East Africa, and it was very evident having been to the surrounding areas right before the trip. It's the diplomatic center of Africa. Addis Ababa is the most diplomatic city in the world, second to London and third to New York, which is pretty amazing. And the Blue Nile starts in Ethiopia. That section highlighted up there goes from Lake Tana to the South Sudan border. You're looking at almost 1,000 kilometers. You're looking at over 900 kilometers of river. And as you can kind of tell, it's a little difficult. It has all those mountains right there. It's the most of the Nile that has gradient. You'll also notice that it's much shorter than the White Nile flowing out of Lake Victoria, but the White Nile is only 15% of the water. So 85% of the Egyptian Nile comes out of the highlands of Ethiopia, which makes it not a new idea to build a dam. It actually has been put out and proposed many times over, but wasn't finally started until 2011. And this was the proposal. This is a monster. This is the largest dam ever to be built in Africa, and it's the largest in the world in terms of volume of concrete. It's actually 3 separate large projects. The main holding, the spillway, and then a saddle dam in the corner. It's going to make a reservoir of 70 cubic kilometers of water, which is enormous. I'll spare the numbers, and it's just a lot of numbers, but we'll give it a comparison to a dam we know, which is the Hoover Dam. This is a third the amount of concrete. And the crazy part is it's actually 3,750th the annual kilowatt hours of output power. Most of that is due to the volume of water of the Nile versus the Colorado River. Colorado River is significantly lower flow, but it's just an enormous monster of a dam. And why is it so important that other countries matter? Because it's the lifeblood of the entire eastern Sahara Desert. The Nile provides life. It's the biannual flooding that bring in floods up onto the banks of nutrients and water, refill the water table, allow crops to grow. And yes, this is all plant and animal life, but it's a direct correlation to human life. You can tell that most of the Sahara Desert is uninhabitable by humans. That giant delta, the river delta, is Cairo. It's the largest city in Africa. It's over 20 million people. And this dam is about to cut off its water supply or regulate it into an annual trickle whenever there's power demand. All that power demand also gives Ethiopia, all that electricity gives Ethiopia the power to then control when we sell it. This dam in particular is going to control 11 different countries worth of power. It's going to triple the amount of power that Ethiopia currently can generate, which is the most generation in all of eastern and northern Sahara. It's pretty crazy. That's why it comes down to a trust situation. And yes, Africa needs clean electricity. The demand for electricity is ever growing, but no one trusts one country in this region to have control over 11 others, which is pretty amazing. Right after we got out off of the river, there was a literal water war. There was terrorist attacks coming, but there was hope. There was a summit. That's the power of the dam, which is huge. It had no clear resolution. Since then, even a few months ago, there's been more attempts at more and more mediation, diplomatic relations over management of the dam, all of that. This diplomatic standstill, mostly because Ethiopia won't come to the table, is why they haven't shut the gates. Ethiopia also has a large amount of internal corruption a lot of internal mismanagement, which is why the dam is only 60% complete. That being said, the important parts of the dam are done. They're just pouring concrete on top, so they could shut the gates if they could reach a little bit of conclusion here. So with all this controversy surrounded by war zones, Somalia, Eritrea, South Sudan, political unrest even within Ethiopia itself, we felt it was even more important to start going down this, one of the biggest watersheds in the world. We'd never be able to look at a globe and say we passed that up. And with that, Curtis, how did we get invited on this trip?
So I was a guide out in Idaho for 3 seasons. I had a really good friend, Lorenzo, Italian guy, and he said, hey, I got an opportunity to do this trip on the Blue Nile, and we're going to be going down for one of the last times ever. So he asked us to be safety kayakers on the trip, and at first I had to really reevaluate if this was something I wanted to do. And then I was looking at a globe, and the Nile's a huge part of the globe, and I was like, I can't really bring myself to say no to such an amazing opportunity. So then I started probing all my friends and said, hey, who wants to go on this crazy trip with me? And Scott was brave enough to come with me. So from there we had to fly a long way out to Africa.
Highly recommend Emirates Air.
About 14 hours our travel time or so.
One flight, 30 hours total.
How many drinks?
Wow.
And we had the opportunity to explore a little bit of Africa before that, so I spent 2 weeks down in Zambia, exploring the Zambezi River, and then flew up and met Scott in Kenya because we had to see some safari life as well. So this is really what most of Africa looks like. If you guys haven't been.
That's what a lot of people living without regulated human disposal systems in place creates.
Yeah. So pretty sad in a lot of the major cities, and we're lucky to go out into a really beautiful environment, a little different. So there are also lots of cool wildlife, like this monkey. They steal bananas from you from your porch.
Is that somebody's roof?
Yeah, that was the hostel we were at. And giraffes.
Oh, wow.
This was in the Masai Mara Park in Kenya. Super beautiful area. Lots of elephants.
Yeah.
Here's a chameleon that Scott just found.
Oh, that's Curtis holding it. We got a chance to go to a really cool eco hostel, one of the top-rated eco hostel in the world on the eastern coast of Kenya. And they had a giant pool table with palm-sized, huge spiders sitting right there to play pool with you. But then we finally flew up to Addis Ababa. And this was a little tiny hotel room that we had in Addis Ababa where, unfortunately, Curtis came down with a really gnarly unknown virus.
Yeah. So somehow on my flight from Kenya out to here, I got super sick. And I was about to start a 34-day river expedition. So I was a little bit nervous at my current state of health. So I spent maybe 5 days in this room, primarily. I had some weird shakes and sickness where my muscles just hurt. It was pretty awful. And in the meanwhile, everyone else was prepping everything for the entire trip.
Yeah, we actually were originally only supposed to spend 3 days and 3 nights in Addis Ababa. But when we got there, we found out there was a ton of political unrest, there was riots in the countryside, and there was a government curfew on traveling at night. And so the company that was going to drive us up with all our gear wouldn't drive until we ended up spending, I think, 5 or 6 total nights. And we ended up being able to prep a ton of our equipment. We literally flew with a lot of this as check-on luggage. These people flew with this. They said it was a ski bag. We had some other people we met on the trip that flew with all their duffels inside the coolers. We had to bring a lot of this in. A lot of gear managed to get there ahead of time, but we realized that, the trip leaders realized they needed more. So at the last minute, we scrambled. We also got to see Lucy, the oldest known remains of our kind, which is pretty cool, found in Ethiopia. She's missing a few important parts there. We also learned just how important coffee is to them and how they loved coffee in every part of their culture. But we also finally got to start looking at the river. This was pretty much the most detailed map we had at this point. The organizer of the trip had gone through with Google Earth imaging pretty much and a few maps and was able to come up with our own kind of map. And then broke this down into sections where we had a little bit more detail. But we started learning about the river. We learned that it's very sacred. It's one of the 4 rivers in the Bible, known as the Gihon. And it's incredibly sacred to the local Ethiopians. It's known as the Abe, where there's people on the deck. Where they actually prohibit people crossing the river. There's only 5 known bridges over the entire 1,000 kilometers right there. One of which is going to be flooded, 3 of which are remnants from World War II and I, the Portuguese bridge, the second Portuguese bridge, and then only the Renaissance bridge is the current bridge allowed cars to travel over it. So imagine having 600 miles of a section where you can't cross except for one specific section. We also got to learn a bunch about the previous trip before us, and we had the talk.
So this here is our fearless leader, Alex Aitken. We were really blessed to have him on the river with us because he had a lot of Africa experience. So when we first got there, we went down into the basement of the hotel, signed our waivers, and got the talk. So they had just finished a preliminary expedition where they had quite a bit of mishaps. So he told us there would be extreme heat, which we knew that would be the case, but you can't just jump in the river if you need to cool off because there are crocodiles. So you have to kind of dip your shirt or get a bucket and throw it over your head or something. Crocodiles were literally everywhere. We took a continuous tally. There were over 200 crocodiles.
600.
Over 600?
It was 603 that we saw with our own eyes. The lead boat saw much more, but they kind of go underwater with the first boat passing.
And one was giant. We'll talk about that one later. Then there were definitely potential for super heavy rains and just being damp all the time. About every 7th local would have an automatic rifle. would be some type of relic from World War II. It was just kind of the culture out there that if you had the money, you would buy a rifle. And we never felt threatened in any way by them, but you just have to know. What's that?
Where was that?
All over the whole river section.
Where?
All the locals we met on the river.
So the entire section of river is a big contraband corridor from South Sudan to Eritrea, and so there's a lot of just movement of weaponry all over. And this is literally, you'll find a tribe that doesn't have a road within 20 kilometers, but they'll have, every male will have a gun.
So it's in America.
They wear them though, all over. They make it very obvious.
Say you'll answer questions at the
Yeah, I'll
end.
answer questions at the end. A bunch of baboons, hyenas, theft was a huge thing on the trip right before ours. 2 of the rafts actually got cut overnight, and they don't know by who or for what reason, but one of the rafts was never recovered. The other raft they found, but it was completely gutted, everything was gone. And that led to a bunch of food shortages, which we were warned about as well. They lost a lot of their equipment, so we had to be prepared for that. There are huge, physically difficult portages. So on the trips before ours, they had to do 5 to 6 portages. A portage is where you have to carry your rafts and all of your equipment around the rapid, because the rapids are just too extreme. You can't. There's no path down that's safe. We had to be prepared for jungle bugs, which weren't just mosquitoes. There's the Nairobi eye, was this certain bug, and if you slapped it, it would release acid onto your skin.
Its tail was filled with necrotic acid. So if you learn to, here in the US, we go smash a mosquito that's biting us, but there you had to learn to rethink and brush or blow bugs off of you. Especially if you're in a kayak and you pull your skirt up, then you hear that thing, feel that thing crawling up your leg.
You can't just smack it. Foot rot, which was very real on the trip before ours. Some people had some serious infections and had to get evacuated on the trip right before ours. Never being alone, which we'll talk a little more about, but we definitely stood out in this environment, and people would just flock to our group, so there was always people around at any moment. Infections, I said, rioting and political turmoil, which we'll talk about, I think, a slide or 2 here.
Yeah. We drove through on our drive. We were told to like hide all our cameras, all of that, through checkpoints and all that. And we drove through buses that were still flipped over and smoldering from being rioted a few days before, which is, like we said, that curfew, the government wouldn't let us travel at night because of all of this. And so there were sections where they literally said, like, all right, you won't go to the bathroom for the next 5 or 6 hours. You're just not going to stop. So.
And some wild rugged terrain and very serious rapids. And the general statement that we just kept hearing was TIA, this is Africa.
So, you run out of food? TIA. We also got to learn a little bit about the previous history of expeditions on the Blue Nile. Most of it came from this book, and then a lot of little quips from other books that our trip leader had known about. But there's only other 5 previous attempts known on the Blue Nile, none of which ever attempted the Northern Gorge. And so until the trip right before ours, no one had attempted the source to the Sahara. And on the trip before ours, they had people medically evac, they had rafts stolen, they had quite a bit of turmoil, they had the trip leader ended up getting separated from the group, it was altogether not a very successful mission. So we were still in the running for the most successful sourced end. Of the other trips before that, 4 of them had death from whitewater, crocodiles, disease, locals. There was one story in this book about a guy that got so hungry he shot and killed a baboon, and then the troop of baboons followed him for the next 40 kilometers of river, and he ended up camping on islands to stay in the middle of the river, because these baboons are known for organized, highly communicative warfare. So here we were sitting in the hotel. Curtis was finally starting to feel a little bit better, and we were about to journey across the country. I was starting to feel pretty terrible with a stomach bug, but we were pretty gung-ho, and we realized, okay, this land looks pretty familiar. Oh wait, there's baboons sitting on the road posts. That kind of looks like maybe the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. But finally, we get up to this little village. So we drove all the way from Addis Ababa through the Renaissance Bridge, all the way up to Bahir Dar. And there's this big mega waterfall called Tisasat Falls, which stands for fire and smoke, because the people that first discovered it, the legend is that they couldn't tell if there was, water and smoke. Water and fire. Good Lord. Because they couldn't tell if the mist was water or fire. And so that upper section, we just self-supported as kayakers, and the rafts put in below the waterfalls for the rest of the northern gorge. And when we started putting on to this section right below the outflow of the lake, we realized the definition of never being alone. We were going to be quite the spectacle, and we would always have a crowd around all of our Western gear, and they had never really seen people try and run this river. So we ran the upper section. It was great. It was a ton of braided streams. There was the first encounter for everyone else with a hippo. I didn't see it. I was facing the other way, and I just heard everyone yelling that there was a hippo behind me. We got to see our first crocodile. We had a little bit of beta that the Tisasat Falls, 40-meter waterfall, unrunnable, turned into a mega section of braided streams, and there's no horizon line, and just to stay left. So here we are paddling, not exactly sure of how far we were, and luckily we made it. And so here's us standing at the rim of this waterfall, and what you can't quite tell is beyond, in the distance, the river then goes over another series of waterfalls, and we ended up having to walk around, rappel our boats down, and then paddle out at the base of this waterfall, underneath all the other waterfalls, into the rest of the gorge. And we have some footage of this in the video at the end, and it's pretty incredible. But here's a little bit of footage while we talk a little bit about the gorge and the trip.
So this section here was really cool. We took just us 6 kayakers on this part. From that big waterfall, we had to rappel our boats down into the side canyon. And then the hardest part was probably peeling back out into the main flow of the Nile. So we were peeling out just underneath that giant waterfall. So you can imagine all that water was pushing up against a wall. And our goal was to get out past that wall and back into this main current. In this section here, you see there's just waterfall after waterfall. And then the entire gorge narrowed again to about 20 feet wide. So all of that flow is in a very narrow corridor.
And we're estimating this is about 20,000 CFS that funnels into this whole gorge.
So we had a huge day. It was 40 kilometers that day. We were told at the top we shouldn't have to deal with crocodiles or hippos. And we saw both. The hippo was about 5 feet from Scott. We rose right behind him. And the crocs at that time, we were really scared of them, so we were paddling away really fast from like 5-foot crocodiles. But we realized later there'd be much bigger ones.
Just to keep it going, we then get to the remnants of one of the old bridges. What's the best thing to do with an old bridge? Curtis. Yep. The river opened up a little bit from the gorge, and we started seeing some of the whitewater of the northern gorge. This was Catfish Falls, and it's hard to give a sense of scale, but this is us looking at it. So the whole river drops about 12, 15 feet. But the interesting part is this is more of how we're never alone. And these rocks are really sharp basaltic rock, and we had rafts made of PVC. So if there's any rafters in the room, you want rubber, not plastic. And we had to be very careful to not touch the rafts, otherwise they'd tear. Pretty much every day we were patching something on one of the rafts. And
so the rafts we got were actually made at a bouncy house castle company in China. The guy who put together this trip sent them dimensions for rafts, and they sent us 6 rafts.
I don't recommend that method.
Not worth the cost.
It's not worth that cost. We made it through this section, then we hit what was called the gauntlet. This is where, once again, about 20,000 CFS funnels into this little tiny gorge that if you're in a boat with sweep oars or a center frame, you're going to touch both sides. And this was pretty gnarly. You can see it's like pretty intricate rock, all of that. We didn't really know just how bad it was until we started climbing around. And we decided the best thing to do was actually just to ghost boat. So we portaged everything, all the valuables, about a half a kilometer around this whole section, and then we just sent the boats through. And I'm actually standing right behind me, I'm filming this, is a 30-foot cave into the side of the walls. And so we kind of decided that, okay, yeah, maybe it's runnable, maybe it's good to go. If you swim, if anything goes wrong, there's undercuts, there's caves, and that water, who knows, maybe 50 feet deep. We have no idea. Like, you can see the water level raises regularly 20, 30 feet. And so I drew diagrams of all of this, but you can kind of tell we put all the rafts in, we just pushed them off into a series of holes. Then they went through this gorge. We had little eddies where we set people to get the boats out, and then finally at the bottom there was this little stick bridge, and we waited for the boats at the bottom. We portaged everything through the cattle field, And the interesting thing was we had great success. We had 4 of our boats go through, and we're like, maybe we should kayak this. Like, we've been down here, we know it really well, and we kind of took a break. We did some, took some salt tabs, all that. And then we sent our last boat through, and it ended up getting sucked completely under an undercut and disappearing like a whole raft, and then popping out downstream. We're like, all right, we made a good call. Like, if a raft is going to do that, the buoyancy of a kayak doesn't stand a chance. We kept going into more stuff. This is called the Crux. This is a big lateral wave that pushes into a big mega hole. Easy for kayaks to punch through, a lot harder for rafts. We were told to set safety as safety kayakers. And like, there's an eddy down there, there's some eddies here. And
so this one was an epic rapid. We were told it's class 5, we're probably going to scout. The trip before us had to portage it because it was unrunnable. And we got there and it looked runnable, but definitely serious. So the kayakers usually go first, set safety down low. Scott decided to go in this tiny little micro eddy on River Right. After the hole. Later we realized it was a total undercut wall. And so water was running underneath it. So at one point, all the water in his eddy kind of drained and he just got flushed out of it.
Like 4 or 5 vertical foot rise.
And then we later learned that this rapid was the spot of one of the previous fatalities on the previous expedition. So we're lucky Scott stayed upright where he was.
But that's okay, we had more adventures to come. This is what we call the Blackwall Cavern. And it's hard to tell, but there's a bunch of stuff upstream, there's a bunch of stuff downstream. And basically this was this is a rapid that we knew we had to eddy out for. And all 4 of our rafts made it, and with the kayakers peeled out, and then our cat raft pilot didn't make it. And we'll leave that aside, but he kept going, and with a passenger.
Yeah, so this day, like Scott was saying, we had actually told locals a couple days in advance that they should come meet us at the riverside because we were going to need help carrying all of our gear.
We'd already decided to portage.
It's about 1 kilometer. You got to walk on all that scree field you can see on the other side. So it's a really wild portage to be carrying rafts, coolers, everything to eat all your food. So everyone made it into this mandatory pullover, and this last boat came in, and they were right in the middle of the river. It was a really terrifying moment because they were dropping into a rapid that's never been run by any boat. So we were frantically trying to get to our ropes, but we threw ropes and they couldn't even get to them because they were so far out in the middle. There was a 62-year-old Cliff on the oars and a 72-year-old passenger on the front.
These are people that just paid as clients. They paid full ticket price, and they expected it to be a plush, easy trip.
So it got pretty serious. The 72-year-old swam in the very first drop. There was 3 major drops in this class 6 rapid. So he's out of the raft in this picture. But the 72-year-old swam all of everything right away. The cat boat and the 62-year-old went into a little sieve, as we call it here, like a spot where you can't make it because there's too many rocks. And he eventually fell out and got to the shore. This was an amazing moment where our trip leader really came and became an incident commander because he was really good at being like, we need you to be here, we need safety kayakers to come out here. So he actually told one of the guides to jump in after the class 6 rapid and swim after Kelly, who was still in the middle of the river not doing anything to help. And so we got to Kelly, our friend Andy got to him.
So that's our trip leader. This is everyone, locals, portaging over this terrain. This is one of the drops in the middle. This is looking from on top of the rock that the raft is next to. And he actually has a radio talking to some other people upstream just to give a sense of the portage and what's going on while we're rescuing.
So someone swam down Kelly. He was kind of broached against a rock by the time he got to him. Got him to shore, and then by that time we had a safety kayaker that had already gotten his boat across the rapid, walked it down and gotten to him. We later got a little bit of confirmation. Scott gave the universal sign for "Are you guys okay?" and he got that one back. So at least we knew that it wasn't a serious medical emergency. We later sent down another kayaker with kind of some resources and a radio, and found out he might have some broken ribs, but a lot better than what could have happened. So from there, it was a kind of crazy day because we had to go ferry across, save Cliff, who was standing cliffed out next to the rapid.
This is Curtis and I. We were hanging out in the cavern of Blackwall Cavern. If you've ever been down the Grand Canyon, this is very similar to Redwall Cavern, except it's filled with all this rock and really difficult terrain. And so we were told to just be stationed at the bottom of the rapid for a while, and then we hear Cliff whistle, or the
For Andy.
Andy whistling. So we paddled around, gave him a rope, paddled up, pulled him around. He was literally just underwater holding onto the rope. And this is our base camp. Cliff's up behind us now, the raft is behind us, and we're just waiting. Our trip leader had sent a crew to try and get the cat raft unpinned. They were unsuccessful. Curtis and I hung out. Right next to us is an enormous ledge hole that's river wide, and we just sit there looking at this for almost half the day while they're all portaging. And finally, we're like, all right, well, we need lunch. We need things like that at least. So we go and talk, and they said it's unrescuable. The raft is unrescuable. Curtis and I disagreed. We've been looking at this rapid all day. And so we launched our own rescue mission where we hiked our boats back up to the top and paddled down the first third of the rapid, got out, started looking for ways to get onto this rock above the rapid, or above the cat raft that was pinned.
So this was a really great teamwork example because Scott and I were really good about just being methodical. We were like, hey, do you think we can get to that rock with our kayaks? And we'd get there and we'd be like, hey, do you think we can get across this rapid section, just us, and somehow get to that raft? And we just kept figuring it out. So we had to do what's called a live bait rescue. So we have life jackets that have an extra little ring in the back with a self-release. And so I had to clip him onto that, and then we had him tied to the side. And he had to jump across the whitewater channel and get onto this rock here. He did an amazing boulder move to get up there. And basically if he missed it, then he would just swing into the shore and he wouldn't go down the rapid. From there he set up a rope system so I could get on there. And then we set up a second rope system so I could kind of belay Scott down to get towards the raft. So once we were there, Scott got a rope on the raft. I was kind of reaming on it while he was pulling on it. It took a while, but eventually it came free. So we thought. Then it was stuck in this position, and we're like, why isn't the raft going anywhere?
You can kind of see this faint little dowel line that's still underwater, wedged at presumably where it's a pinch point there.
Okay.
At this point, we'd also thrown a rope from the boat to people on shore, so if it did come loose, it would swing. This also kind of illustrates how much other mank is happening. That's that huge river-wide ledge hole. This is another big ledge hole. Amazingly, the raft got stuck over here instead of just flushing or flipping or destroying itself, whatever. Up here's more. There's just an enormous amount of stuff happening around us at all times. On the other side, our trip leader is kind of just watching. We actually had a documentary person, one of the people that worked on Damnation here, and he was taking photos and had a drone and stuff. He has never contacted us since. We would love that footage. We have tried super hard to get that footage.
So eventually Scott got his face all the way in the river with a knife and cut that rope. And the boat came free. And from there we were exhausted, but we had the option to either portage the rest of the way or to get in our kayaks and be the first ones to run the bottom half of this rapid. And we've been looking at it so long we kind of saw right where the line was. So we put our skirts on and we ran it.
Really hard to give a sense of scale again. I just like these because I tried to remember as much as possible. But this means a lot more to us, I guess. I won't really explain the whole thing. But finally we get to the end of the Northern Gorge. And it was just epic. It took us an enormous amount of energy. We have a video footage of our friend that did his own little personal interviews at the end of the day with his GoPro, talking about how crazy of a day. You can just see the weariness in his eyes and the horse truck that we thought we lost Kelly. But this is also a chance we took a time to regroup and celebrate. I like this photo because it's how much processing we did of our water. We had a few of those nice water jugs that we have in the US. Then we had oil cans, basically. We'd have oil cans, we'd put sand in and water, we'd shake it, hope it would scrape all the oil out. We did that a few times. Put a bunch of bleach in, bleach it out. And then we had some nice other stuff that Will actually brought with him. He's a Grand Canyon guy, he's a really great dude. Many of you have probably seen those little water filters before, that system. He brought that with him in his suitcase. That's an RO filter and a ceramic filter. We'd put the water in buckets, we'd settle it with chemical agents, and then we'd double filter it, and then we'd over bleach it. And that was how we stayed sick from waterborne illness. But it was basically an entire duty every day was water duty. And you had 2 people on it, and we'd use side streams as much as we could, but it was just a huge, drinking, it was our lifeline down there. So finally, we made it to the gorgeous and inner gorges and had a chance to appreciate the beauty. It was just this unreal section of river, these huge basalt layers of rock that were the crazy sharpness up there had finally, this was deeper in the layers, it cooled slower, it was columnar, it wasn't jagged. And it gave us a chance to kind of just like appreciate being here. And it led to the second day in the gorgeous gorges, these enormous basalt pillars. To give you a sense of scale, there's a little tent. So these are huge, huge basalt pillars. And this led to a celebration. We're like, you know what, we made it through the Northern Gorge, let's celebrate.
Yep. So
Let's eat.
we were also starving already at this point. And really happy to just be out of the craziest rapids, at least for now. And so we made a deal with a local across the river to buy a sheep. And he actually swam the sheep across the entire Nile.
Just carrying it.
One hand on the sheep and the other hand just swimming, making all sorts of crazy noises as he swam. So he came and asked if people wanted to help, and this is our friend Joe here who helped volunteer to slaughter the lamb.
Yep. We learned how to use our kitchen knives to their full usage. But it gave us a huge amount of meat and some guts, which the locals valued hugely. It was payment enough just to give it back to them. This is also a great chance to talk about our food. It's really difficult. We don't have a Costco. We don't have a Sam's Club. We were out in the flea market, like, oh, let's get 3 eggs here. Let's get 6 eggs there. Let's get another egg here. For 34 days for 18 people, which is just a huge amount of food. And we had a really low budget. The person who organized the trip had no concept really of how much food we wanted for this kind of output. And we have no ice. There's no way to keep anything. We had coolers, which were glorified damp boxes. And we lost a ton of produce in the first week just to rot instantly. And at this point, we learned just how comforting some good rice and sauce is. And then we continued downstream and we started seeing some great wildlife that when you're paddling, you're like, yes, there's a 2-foot-long crocodile snout in that eddy. We started developing our own rating system for eddies and then also adding that to rapids. And be like, okay, there's 3 crocodiles in there, that's a 3C eddy. Or we'd be like, okay, there's a class 4 rapid, and there's an eddy at the bottom where you can stop, but there's like 4 known crocs we saw when we scouted, so it's a class 4 C4. We developed what our trip leader calls croc eyes, where you can quickly scan the top of the water and pull out a snout over driftwood or a rock or anything. But we kept going, and it just got beautiful. This is really amazing. You can see the high water lines, like 20, 30 feet above us. This is how much the rainy season pushes through this river. We have no idea how deep it is. And it just got, they call it the gorgeous gorges. We also had a chance to see some like true like hidden side stream, lost world-esque side streams. Don't talk about hygiene.
Yeah, so Scott and I at this point really appreciated when we saw any side stream, and Scott would just keep the Dr. Bronner's with him at any moment, just in case we saw one. We would jump on the opportunity. They're usually colder as well, so they cool us down. But hygiene is a huge thing on an expedition like this. 34 days out there where you don't get a real shower. So we had...
And the water has a bacteria that's unknown to us. Our bodies are not used to this bacteria, and it is black water, basically.
So we had luckily bought a bunch of baby wipes, and every night you dedicate maybe one to your hands, and then your feet, and then your face, and then your feet, and then the rest of your body, and then your feet. So you kind of triple did your feet to make sure they weren't getting foot rot, because that's a very serious thing we could develop out there as well.
We had a few people get foot rot, and our best solution that we could come up with was just over-bleach water and let them soak their feet in the bleach water. We started seeing baboons hanging out. That guy's kind of alone, but you can kind of, well, I guess not. We have other pictures. We frequently saw troops of anywhere from 20 to 80 baboon troops just walking around. We also got that gorgeous equatorial sunsets. And this finally brought us to that one bridge that we had driven across. This is the Renaissance Bridge, where we decided it was pretty much mandatory that we send part of the group back all the way to Addis Ababa to get some more food. And then the other half of the group stayed right here on the riverside. And when we first got here, we crossed this on the way up to Bahir Dar. Our trip leader instantly gets out and starts spotting with a binocular. And you can see like 6 crocs on the riverbanks, and he's just instantly looking for where we could camp without crocs. And it just really warned us that the Black Gorge was coming up. This was the known birthplace of the Nile crocodile. This is where we saw the highest concentration, the lowest amount of people, and the entrance had this known man-eater crocodile. It's a 6-meter crocodile known as the Gatekeeper.
So this gorge is really where we saw a ton of wildlife, and the humans couldn't really live here because it's just really gorged out and very jungly. And there was this crocodile right here known as the Gatekeeper. So he was a documented man-eater. He had actually pulled someone out of a raft in a previous expedition. And he had killed many locals. The locals knew him as well. He was darker than the rest and bigger, about 15 feet long. An insane crocodile. So this day was Thanksgiving Day, and we had to pretty much plan the whole second part of our trip around this day because we wanted to pass the Gatekeeper before he was really awake and hunting. So crocodiles being cold-blooded animals, they don't really hunt much at night, and so we wanted to really pass him right at the beginning of the day. So we woke up at 3 in the morning. This shot is probably from about 5 a.m. when we passed him. Luckily, this was the one time we saw a splash of him.
And then he let us go.
And then he let us go. But that day was mandatory no kayaks in the water. The rafts had a different setup. We had 2 paddlers for each raft, 1 person rowing as well. And then we had rocks lining the outside of all the rafts. Because we were told that if a crocodile pops up, it might pop back down and then pop up maybe behind the raft, a lot closer. And if you can get 1 good shot with a rock to its head, that would usually be enough to deter it.
Yeah.
And we would throw some rocks, but yeah.
We also we carry, as kayakers, we carried rocks in our life jackets. So we'd peel into the edge of an eddy right next to the current. And then we'd throw a bunch of rocks into the eddy, and you can see typically they just pop up. You kind of give us a sense of where they are, how many there are, if they're there. Then we feel comfortable to come into the eddy in a different location. At the end of this day, we were pretty emotionally and mentally exhausted, but we got to this amazing camp that had a surf wave. We think we're probably the first people ever to surf this wave. And we had to let off some steam. Some really good surfing. And we checked out we asked the trip leader, we threw rocks in the eddies, we made sure there's no crocodiles. And we just went and surfed our brains out for Thanksgiving Day to say we made it through the Black Gorge section.
And Thanksgiving dinner, rice and sauce. No seconds.
And we weren't done with the whitewater. This is called 200-meter eddy. It's actually immediately downstream of an outflow, side stream river. That's the outflow of a sugarcane plantation. And it was like literally jet black, disgusting, smelly, thick water. And it was flowing right into this river. And we're like, okay, well, we'll just hopefully not get splashed too much, and we'll go through this rapid. And we knew there was crocodiles at the bottom. We'd scouted. And we knew there was one line through that could sneak this big hole. And Boris ignored that.
Yeah. Fortunately, Boris didn't take the rapid very seriously. And he was like, oh, this looks easy. And right into the main part of the biggest hole, flipped really slowly. Kelly, the 72-year-old from the previous epic, is on that boat as well. The most swimmer awards. And Tashome, our armed guard. So we had an armed guard with us the entire time.
We hired from
Bogdaya. He had an automatic rifle that was on that boat as well. So when that boat flipped, he was really nervous that his papers were going to get wet. And it's really important you have all your paperwork.
Yeah, Ethiopia is basically a military state, and we had military checkpoints at all the bridges, the beginning, the end. And if he didn't have papers, he could be put in jail. So it was really stressful for him. But finally, we started seeing people again. And this is kind of what it looked like. Every corner we'd come around, and people would be coming. Kids would shout at us, jump out, try and swim in the back of our boats, things like that. And we got to try to meet some of them, which was awesome. Some of the families. That's Tashome, our local, or the armed guard that traveled with us. And Curtis and I are the white guys. It was really fun to get a chance to talk with them. Another huge person that was valuable for us was Baraket. He was a guide we hired from Addis Ababa to come with us, to speak the local language, to kind of make peace with people. He taught us a ton of local culture. He could be friends with anyone. His name means blessing, and he truly was a blessing to us.
Yeah, I made extremely good friends with Baraket. We just kind of vibed really well right off the get-go. And it was really cool because whenever we'd get to these camps, we'd meet local cultures, local people, and I could just sit down and talk to them. And that was a huge part of it too, to be like, hey, you guys know they're putting in a dam here? They like kind of knew something was happening downstream, but they didn't realize where they were was going to be flooded. It was really sad to hear that. no one had told them that.
Yeah.
And
And then
one time we had often people too would just swim to our boats. They would just see our boats and they'd never seen anything like it. They'd strip down naked and just swim to the rafts. So we would pull them in and we couldn't really communicate, but they would just be looking at us like we were aliens. And Bearcat asked them, or one time one of the guys asked Bearcat, "Hey, take me with you." And he said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Where do you want to go?" And the guy just said, "Anywhere but here." And Bearcat had to just, tell them, "You really got to appreciate where you live." But it seemed nothing like us. We were definitely aliens.
this was the village. This is the largest village we passed. Where I stand out. I got a tan on this trip. Amazingly, actually, I never got sunburned once this trip. I even made custom little paddles out of covers out of a torn handkerchief. And then they loved it because it was bright colors. But this is the village that we saw that actually is the beginning of the high water line. They're going to be underwater soon. But word got around, and then we realized we were really never going to be alone. Every camp, every push-off in the morning, we were going to see tons of people. We got to hustle a little bit, so I'm going to try and speed it up a little. They tried to sell us chickens, some gorgeous chicken. But we always had a crowd. It was awesome. We started downstream even more. We were kind of through a lot of the gradient, so things would start slowing down, but get amazingly gorgeous. True jungle, lots of hippos. We'd wake up, and it would just be like this amazing sight. It felt like you were going into the lost world, kind of. And,
this camp, we actually had a hippo that came in and said, "What's up?"
In that little eddy right there.
Saw some bubbles, and then he swam downstream and found a different beach for the night.
This is also where it became a little bit harder to get dry. You're just damp all the time. And it's more jungle. I'm going to keep hustling. Even better sunsets. Jungles also mean more bugs. This was our friend Dakota. He just woke up. We don't know what it was from, but he just had a rash from bites all over it. And it just goes to show, that's a hand-sized spider, and its body is only the width of a finger, and it's really hard to see against the rock. So we'd have lunch, and we'd peel out, and then you realize, oh, you're leaning against this rock, and there's that right next to you, about the size of your face. We started seeing a lot more wildlife. The cows. There's also more goats and sheep. These you think, oh, we could buy a cow and really have a feast, but these are African cows. They eat tin cans and rocks and not the best eating. Then we had a little bit more whitewater. We had a series called The Deaf, the Dumb, and the Blind, and this was the deaf, and this is Tashome, our armed guard, checking it out. And it was basically just a wave train for us. On the previous trip that he'd just been on, it was a massive whitewater section that was really scary for all of them. And we're like, well, maybe we're out of whitewater. Because they said the ones downstream were even mellower. But then we get to the dumb, and it was this major feature for us. It's hard to tell. We scouted originally from over there, and there's not really a good line. There's a bunch of rocks, big pour-overs, all that. This is a river-wide, massive hole. We weren't convinced was a clean go, and the tongue flows immediately into the largest part of the hole. So we really debated this for a long time. We decided we weren't going to run it that afternoon. We were going to camp, set it up, and really have a chance to debate this, which is where our trip leader really shone again.
Yeah, this is another great opportunity where Alex showed his leadership, because we were at the campfire that night. Everyone had been looking at it for hours at the rapid. He asked each and every one of us what we thought of the rapid, what line we might take, and if we'd be comfortable in a kayak or in a raft. Really sneaky, cool line that was way on river left. And if you drove really hard at the beginning, you came into a small little slot, and then you actually had to get your raft beached onto a rock, spin off of it, but by then you were a little bit left of that main hydraulic.
And being beached on the rock was critical because it held you from getting pushed. If you didn't go hard enough, the rock would bounce you into the main hydraulic. But if you actually get stuck, tail of the boat swings, and you go through the lesser part of the hydraulic. And it just really showed us a new way of reading water. This also kind of illustrated how important group dynamics are. Our group dynamics are really fracturing at this point, and we kind of had separated into things and into factions. And our trip leader kind of made us pull together and really stick through a pretty mangy rapid. This is also, we had more crocodiles in each of the eddies at the bottom.
It's classified as C3 on this one.
You knew that if you swam, even if your boat flushed or it flipped and you swam, you're basically going to just hang out with a bunch of crocodiles. But we made it into the lower gorges, where the jungle became a little less dense and where it's all going to be reservoir. And we started seeing even more hippos. It's really hard to tell. There's a little hippo head popping up. It was really cool. We just kind of paddle silently through. And like, that's zooming in.
So every hippo experience we had was kind of peaceful and cool. They would just kind of be in an eddy and they'd pop up like a whale, release their nostrils.
So you can kind of hear.
Cruise by.
You can hear him breathe.
There it goes.
Right next to us, too.
There's another one.
Or
So
their kayaks.
we would just go perfectly silently, not disturb them, just let them know we're here. We passed another village that was massive. And these guys are really cool. They make giant wooden bowls and they pay them for gold. And then they walk whatever it is to the nearest market and they trade all their gold for goods. And we really had a chance to talk to these guys for a second. They didn't really understand the idea of the river rising. Like they didn't understand the concept of a reservoir or a dam. They had heard it, they knew the words. And the government claims publicly that they were going to relocate people that were going to be displaced, but they had no idea. They had no warning, there was no plans. And it really struck us that, wow, this is going to be under 100 feet of water soon. And they don't know what to do. We also found giant, Australia, California, Africa, it's all kind of the same. Giant jungle fires. This is unique in that the villagers, every rainy season, it gets so damp and then everything grows so quickly in the jungle, they then set fire to their own fields. The charcoal, the nutrients goes back into the soil, they can then grow sorghum or teff, and they don't really care because it's going to be rainy season, it's going to grow back. So these wildfires would get wildly out of control and there's no one there to patrol them. And we come around the corner and you just hear this massive like wind tunnel of noise, and you just see these massive hillsides on fire that were all presumably man-made. Most of them we had confirmed that. And then you get into where they just straight up clear-cut the forest. This is where detritus would flow downstream, clog up the dam. And also this is a great chance to talk about how many birds there were. Birds are everywhere. There's 1,400 species of birds in Ethiopia alone. There's only 2,000 in all of North and South America combined. So it's pretty amazing. They're constantly noisy. There was birds that sounded like babies crying in the bushes. There was birds that sounded like digital alarm clocks at dawn and dusk. They'd sit there going, yeah. So we're exhausted at this point. We're super excited to get to the thriving metropolis of Sirba. And we're like, dang, like they're going to have Coca-Cola because you can get that in the middle of the South Pole. You can get some beers, you can get some injera, which is their local food. And here we are in kind of a miserable ecstasy of getting this local meal put together for us and in one of those huts. And our stomachs are super upset, and I take all those birds as an omen. I got super sick from that meal and spent a day being just totally miserable, and everyone thought I was getting malaria. Then I finally spent 24 hours puking, and then I spent the next 24 hours under a wet blanket, being extremely dehydrated. We're like, well, we're almost to the end. Let's feast again. Pick up another little... This time it was a goat. I recommend the sheep. Actually, this might have gotten me sick too. I don't know. But we ate it. It was great. We caught a Vengu catfish, which is this massive, like 25-pound catfish. We ate that. We also got to see some of the local plants that just grow wild everywhere. We tried to bring back to Colorado. And then finally, we made it to our last camp. You can see it's kind of just open. It's becoming the desert now. And it was just really surreal for us. We had gone through a ton of this expedition. It was kind of, we didn't know what to think of it yet. We just knew that the next day was loading up these rigs, driving 6 hours to Asosa. We were, at this point, 15 kilometers from the South Sudan border. And we could see the smoke coming up from the concrete plant at the dam. And we could see these massive power lines leaving. We had been told on the river that there was just too much turmoil near the border to drive all the way back to Addis Ababa. So we booked flights straight home from Asosa to Addis Ababa. And we had one more little tiny ritual. They love coffee. It was really fun. You can see about half those cups are filled with sugar. Very common. They make little tiny kettles. They put them on the little tiny coals. Then you make about 4 cups only per pot. And then boom, we were on this ultra modern aircraft leaving Ethiopia, looking out the window, unsure of what to think, trying to picture everything out the window, figuring out that we had just done 916 kilometers of the most successful mission, almost no incidences of consequence. We learned a ton about the sacredness of the river. We got to name some of the rapids. We got into first descent in some of the rapids. We got to understand how complicated the local situation was. And we also got to look at each other on the airplane and think about having a best friend on this trip.
Yeah. Without Scott on the trip, we really learned a lot about friendship out there. And without each other, I don't know if the whole trip might have gone a little bit differently. We even brought Kelly, the 72-year-old who swam at the top, all the way down the bottom. So everyone that attempted to do the entire thing made it, which was so cool. And just, it was really the little things, like when Scott was sick, bringing him soup to his bed, you know, or he could just tell I needed to tap out rowing for days on end. He would kayak over and help me just row my cataract at that point. And it just really taught us a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally I could not have done this without Curtis. I wouldn't have done it if anyone else had called me and said, let's go to Africa and kayak this river. And it also just, it took that removal. It took 34 days out there. It took being starving for most of it. It took splitting that Snickers bar, saying, you know what, we're going to have dessert. It's going to be a great night. We're going to split a Snickers bar. Even though they don't have granola bars over there. And or we'd sit in our tents. We got known as for just always setting up our tents right next to each other. And we just, like, he'd listen to Queen on his phone and we just debrief the night. And then also we knew it was the person that would go to the ends of the world. After all that, we still had to go ski in Dubai on our 13-hour layover. Highly recommend it. Best skiing out there. And with that, our time's up. We have a video. Unfortunately, we don't even have the full video. It didn't upload properly, and we don't have time. We will find a way to send out a link or share it on our social media or something. Curtis worked really hard. It shows a lot of the stuff we talked about live from GoPros. We wish we had time. Well, we have 4 minutes of it. We had 12 minutes, but we only have 4 right now.
All right, awesome stuff. I think we have time for maybe 3 questions. So if anybody has a question.
I want to know who were the clients? Where did they come from?
Yeah.
Perfect. You back there, sir.
Correct. We had, so this is a section in the video. Our friend gives a debrief. This trip would not fly in the United States. We had no extra life jackets. We did not even have current modern life jackets for all our clients. Kelly showed up with his personal life jacket from 1920. we had one water filtration system that we've flown in with our carry-on baggage. So the question was if we had any backup water. Our backup was bleach. And we used it a lot. We dulled our taste buds pretty well by the end of the trip, and helped clean our own guts. And it was truly something that, like, yeah, the guy who put together this trip wanted to, not our trip leader, he didn't go, but wanted to make this a commercially viable trip, and all of us wrote raving reviews of how that was impossible. So.
All right, you ma'am, I'm gonna try to get this mic to you.
I can speak loud.
Oh, okay.
So when you guys got to the bridge, was anybody thinking about turning back at that moment? And also, in addition to that question, you were talking about group dynamics and how you had to work together as a team. Are there people that you wanted to take that bridge out?
Well, to answer your question, no one really wanted to leave. We were very concerned about Kelly. We had him go with the resupply group to Addis Ababa, go to a clinic, get x-rayed and ultrasound. He had some internal bruising, but that was it. So the owner of this company that put this together said he has to keep going. He had paid his money. So I guess we kind of wanted him to go. We ended up having to straight up help him bathe and soak his feet and help him get out of his tent every day, which is just extremely strenuous on us. As for the group dynamics, it was really tough. It's hard. I'm introverted. He's extremely extroverted. Without him, the ice definitely, I probably would have regretted saying a few things to people. Curtis broke the ice, always held the team together. There's definitely some egos on the trip, but in the end, yeah, I mean, we're best friends. We haven't really spoken to some of those people since.
One more. You in the back.
Did the two people that you guys hired have any rafting experience, or did they know what they were getting into and they said yes?
They had came on the trip just right before ours, and so Bearcat knew the area really well, and he was like, I love rafting, but neither of them were really strong swimmers, So we definitely had to know that going into it. But both of them just loved the opportunity to be on the rafts in general. We tried to get them in the kayaks, but they wouldn't get in.
It was fun. They didn't have any experience. We all gave them gifts at the end, like a Nalgene and a helmet and a life jacket and all that, and that was huge for them. They felt like they were rafters now, and it was really cool to have them. We couldn't have done it without them. Thank you.